Hello, my name is Andy from Oxford Computer Training. You're about to see an excerpt from one of our Azure AD Connect videos. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to our Azure AD Connect identity expert. I hope you enjoy it.
Authentication, device options. Let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to start by talking about device management in Azure AD in general, and then focus on Azure AD Hybrid Join. There are specific additional advantages to having both, and it is the type of registration that is configured through and enabled by Azure AD Connect. And Azure AD Connect is what we're talking about here, so that's why that one's interesting. We obviously need to know about which devices are supported, and we need to know how to implement it. Then there is a second device management feature which is enabled by Azure AD Connect, and that is device write-back, so we'll talk a little about that. And then we'll go on to do a demo of the configuration of device options, and that's largely a wizard-driven affair. So thinking about device management in Azure AD in general, the aim is that users are accessing resources from devices that meet the standards for security and compliance. We want to know about the nature of the device that they're using. We want to know that we can trust that device and hence give them access to corporate resources. There are three types of device management within Azure AD. The first two are cloud only. So Azure AD device registration is for cloud devices. Bring your own personal devices. So these are the tablets and phones that people typically have, that users typically have, that are their own. And then Azure AD Join is aimed at organizational devices. So these are not the traditional domain join computers that we'd have typically on premises, but it's the cloud devices that an organization provides. And if users are going to be accessing SaaS applications, for instance, we would like to know that they're using a properly configured, safe organizational device. But the third kind, the kind that we're really interested in here, is hybrid Azure AD Join. Now, this is aimed at domain joined computers. So we have computers that are domain joined, but we also have them registered with Azure AD. And as a result, because it's both, we call it hybrid. Okay, and that is implemented through Azure AD Connect, and that's why this is interesting. Now, sticking for a moment with the cloud, the benefits for any device registered with Azure AD are primarily, or first we'll say, that the user gets a single sign-on experience. So the user is signing on to their device, the device trusts them. Because they're registered, Azure trusts the device, and so they get the single sign-on experience, the single sign-on access to managed SaaS applications. That said, Intune could be used to make that access conditional. In other words, depending on the nature of the device, depending on the condition of the device, we could decide, an administrator could decide to step up to MFA, multi-factor authentication, before getting access to some particular resource, or blocking access altogether because of the nature of the device. So we can have a policy we can have device policy-based decisions giving conditional access to resources. And by the way, another benefit is Windows Hello support. So again, that's all tied in with single sign-on. So the user uses Windows Hello to get access to the device, and then they get their single sign-on into the cloud. That's the cloud. What about Hybrid Join? Well, what you get are all the things that you have always had with a domain joined device. So as long as you've got line of sight to an on-premises domain controller, which you typically would if you're within the corporate environment, then you get seamless on-premises access. You can use apps with NTLM Kerberos authentication. Administrators can use group policies to configure settings, and use System Center Configuration Manager to configure devices, to control configuration of all devices in the organization. You can continue to use image solutions. But by the way, if you do rely on SysPrep, you must create the images from an installation that's not been registered with Azure AD. What devices are supported? Well, domain joined Windows 10 or Windows 2016 server devices quite naturally supported. Emphasis there on domain join. That's the whole point of hybrid Azure AD Join. Down-level devices also supported, with some provisos. In federated environments, they're supported easily enough. In non-federated environments, through seamless single sign-on. So the assumption is that if you're in a non-federated environment using one of the managed authentication methods, that is either PHS or PTA, which we talked about a lot in this course, with seamless single sign-on. So just to be quite clear, the registration of Windows down-level devices is not supported if you're using PHS or PTA alone, only if you're using seamless single sign-on, and also not supported when using roaming profiles as it happens. Thinking now about implementation, we would always say check the latest Microsoft documentation. There's the link. We'll include it in our links document. And first of all, you're going to check prerequisites, which is really the point of checking the Microsoft documentation. So we'll go through these in a bit more detail in a moment, but in all cases, check the prerequisite. In all cases, you're going to need the service connection point. I'll explain about that in a moment, but that is how each device, each domain joined PC is going to know which Azure tenant to connect to. In the case of federation, there's additional work to do with claims. We're playing down federation, as I've said before. We need to enable non-Windows 10 devices because Windows 10 devices are enabled by default. So if you've got down-level devices, we need to enable those. We might want to control deployment and rollout. A very simple, perhaps not granular enough way of doing that is if you're not synchronizing the OU, if you've filtered out an OU that contains computers, they're not going to be included. So that'd be one way of doing it, but we'll look at that in more detail in a moment. You will probably want to verify that everything's working after you've done your implementation. So let's drill down and say, first of all, prerequisites. Latest Azure AD Connect, that's absolutely normal. The way that you typically work with Azure AD Connect is always to have the latest version. There'd have to be a good reason not to. Make sure computer objects are correctly synchronized. Now, out of the box, by which I mean if you do an express install or you just take the default options as you go through the wizard, computer objects will be included along with users and groups. So this is just a matter of making sure that you have indeed included the object. The sync engine is able to discover those objects in AD. There are some URLs that need to be accessible during registration, including for federated domains, your organization's STS. And then you've got to make sure that SSSO, seamless single sign-on, is configured correctly if it's needed. So if you're using down-level clients, as we just discussed. And finally, web proxy auto discovery to be implemented on any proxy server so that Windows 10 computers can register. So there's a simple set of prerequisites. Now the service connection point, which we've mentioned a number of times, this is an object then that's created either through the wizard or through a PowerShell commandlet. We'll look at that in a moment. And that is going to be created in AD and contains the Azure AD tenant information. It's a very simple object, and if you look at the very bottom of this slide, you can see the two attributes there, the Azure AD name, that happens to be one of our student environment names there, and the Azure ID. So that is how a domain-joined computer gets to know which tenant it would be associated with. And there'll be one of these SCPs for each forest that contains domain-joined computers which need to be synchronized. Now, as I say, it's configured either in the wizard or via PowerShell. If you do it via PowerShell, there's the commandlet for doing it. And there's a little bit of example code for poking around and having a look at the SCP.
You have been watching an excerpt from one of 26 authoritative demonstration and explanation videos in our Azure AD Connect video series. If you'd like access to more free resources from us, want to find out more about these videos and the other courses that we offer, please visit our website. Thank you for watching.